The next session is a panel discussion. This panel discussion focuses on our topic, AI-powered credit, risk, and lending models, the opportunities it provides, and potential pitfalls. Now, taking this panel discussion forward and moderating this discussion, we have with us Mr. Malcom Gomes, COO IDfy, and we have our eminent speakers joining us for this panel discussion. We have Mr. Hitarth Saini, Head of Marketing, Freo, Ms. Meghna Suryakumar, Founder and CEO, crediWatch, Mr. Tarun Singh, COO SBI Payments, Mr. Sumit, Nigam, CTO, Perfios, and Mr. Varun, Bhalla, Director, Sales, CRIF. Requesting our esteemed panelists to kindly make your way to the stage. Thank you so much, dignitaries, for taking the time off and joining us out here and being a part of Day 2 of India Digital Summit 2026. We're looking forward to your thoughts and inputs. Without any further ado, Mr. Malcom, please lead the way.
Thank you. And I think, as the MC said, this is the panel that's keeping you from lunch. So we'll try and make this interesting and wrap up by 1:30. So just in terms of the backdrop of today's session, I think some context, and then we'll get going. So I think for the last several decades, underwriting techniques, models, early warning system models have been pretty static. And I think we're just witnessing, or have been witnessing, a little bit of a shift in that. Instead of looking necessarily at backward-looking snapshots, historic behavior, there's possibility of looking at more real-time behavior, perhaps even predictive behavior of the future. And therefore, the belief at least is for perhaps with segments, customers, strata of society who might not have that deep data trail or a footprint, is there sort of opportunity to bring more and more borrowers, invisible borrowers, thin file borrowers into the fold, and therefore drive economic progress. But as we think about that, I think the idea is also there are of course opportunities, but perhaps this has to be balanced with the right guardrails, ensuring the right biases do not creep in. At the end of the day, models are trained on historic data. So I think those are some of the things we will look to explore in this session. How do you ensure that while more and more of these sophisticated techniques are used to different extents in the lending ecosystem at different stages, but ensuring the right balances and guardrails are in place. So those are some of the things we're going to explore, and that's the backdrop of today's conversation. As the MC said, I represent IDfy, and one of our 3 platforms is called One Risk, where we work with providing a set of hundreds of or thousands of data signals, and that's my worldview into sort of this conversation. So I look forward to a great interaction with the panel. So with that, I think we'll start. Let's perhaps start talking about the current landscape and opportunities. And I'm going to start the first question with you, Varun. You represent, of course, the bureau, and the bureau is a big enabler to the lending ecosystem. So bureau and that by extension, traditional techniques and models have worked for decades, but they also have certain drawbacks and certain blind spots. So could you maybe elaborate what they are and how some of the more modern AI-enabled techniques are solving for that? So we'd like to start with you, Varun, and then maybe the same question to you, Tarun, after that. Would love for you to add on, but please get us going.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I think it's a very important topic and an important time to have a discussion around how AI is actually changing how we underwrite, right? And we were speaking before the panel, and there were points around what exactly is AI when we talk about how those models are being used, or what AI models are being used across the lending ecosystem and a lending life cycle. And as you rightly said, there have been models which have been traditionally used for a long time, have had certain kind of blind spots. And when we say blind spots, they're basically, one of the big challenges is these models have always been created a point in time.
Correct.
So each time that we create a model, we take a snapshot of that time period and we go backwards and see how people previously had behaved before that time. So it takes a snapshot and comes in. But if we look around our world, everything is changing almost on a daily basis. sometimes we think about COVID, how COVID came so suddenly, and how there are these macro impacts which keep happening, the current global situations that is going on, and all of those the models don't always quickly adapt to that. So that has been possibly one of the areas where we used to face a constraint, and I think that constraint exists for some, will continue to exist for some time. But the generative AI or the new abilities as they are forming around, they are allowing us to bring in different data sets and build out different rules around the existing models. So while the existing models possibly are not changing for the near future, but what definitely is going to happen is that we would be able to incorporate a little more of the generative models and a little more AI process around it, which will allow for additional inputs to be used in that cycle.
Got it. Tarun, your view?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here, Malcolm. I think what Varun has said, I'll just like to add to that. I know when we talk about the blind spot, the blind spot, according to me, is the entire risk assessment itself when it comes to the lending part, and then I'll come to the AI. What is the problem with the entire lending model today? When we talk about the underwriting any type of customers from any segment, generally we have seen that we follow a legacy in the sense of the entire model, the current model in the financial institutions are based on certain availability of the data. If you talk about the banks, then you would have the customers' behavior in their saving accounts, current accounts, and basis that you come to a conclusion that what kind of lending should be extended. You have bureau data available basis that the models are being created. You look for the stability of the income, you look for continuity of the income, and basis that you do the lending. But in this entire process, what we have seen is that whenever there is a volatility, in case if there is a cyclical change, economic downturn, we have seen that for the default ratios, that changes, and therefore, and if I talk about the new economy, the trend in the economy where most of the employment, apart from the formal employment, today is being part of the gig economy, is happening through through the gig workers. And on the business side, we see MSMEs, having these seasonal businesses, having dynamic cash flow, and therefore, an upgrade of model is required, and where AI actually comes in the picture, where instead of identity-based underwriting, one can actually do the behavioral-based underwriting and extend the scope of giving the credit-based products. So I think that's the blind spot. The blind spot, to my mind, is the current underwriting process, and AI models can actually fill the gap.
Got it. No, thank you. I think, and I think as both of you said, the blind spot affects some customer segments more disproportionate than others, right? Perhaps not necessarily people in this room, but typically thin file borrowers, new to credit customers, people with limited data trails, first time jobbers, perhaps, right? And therefore, I think going to my second question, alternate data has been around for a while, but now with AI, how is that helping cater to sort of thin file customers is the question that I have for maybe starting with you, Hitarth, and then going to you, Sumit. How is AI now helping to really cater to how are these kind of segments becoming more bankable?
Sure, thanks. So taking from the previous question, probably from Varun and Sumit's feedback, I think, see, the way lending is happening today, and of course, bureaus being big enablers, but the spread of the scales and the scores that we have today, it's between 300 to probably 900, right? And this is where almost 300, 400 million population is fit into and then looked at by all the lending players.
True.
Right? So, and especially for those segments that we are talking about, the concentration risk is between probably 650 to 700 or so. Almost for each point, there is around 1 million plus data points that needs to be looked at. So, whenever lending is being looked at, for hard cutoffs, there are very super high cliffs. Right? So that's something that, of course, this is how the system has been made. It's survived tough times, and it's a robust system where nobody's challenging that. But with new segments coming into picture, probably this needs to be expanded a little bit, right? And that's where AI can help a little bit, either expand this segment or to consumer segments that are about to enter these. What are some of the other layers? Especially from the alternate data perspective as well. So we at Freo, we do cater to a large amount of consumers and underwrite them on a regular basis, of course with all the enablers into picture. But then we get a lot of consumers who are thin file. We get a lot of consumers where data is missing, where the credit risk officer has to put their risk hat on their head and figure out whether the decision would be right for the org or not, and especially for the lenders as well. So that's where alternate data comes into picture. Being an ecosystem play, we enable our consumers with UPI, we enable our consumers with insurance, with a lot of other investment products as well, and with lending. So that is where we are able to get a lot of data, of course with users' consent on the app, and build models internally, and are able to kind of like take a risk on that. Of course, I won't say that this is 100% AI at the moment. We are also learning. And I think we should not really leave the reins to AI in the beginning, because otherwise it will suddenly balloon up and eventually cause NPAs in your book, right? So that's where probably a 10%, 12% risk that's being taken on these segments. That is what our strategy is. We are doing that to a certain level. We are also learning, and it's helping us push the envelope a little bit ahead.
Sumit, your views?
So I would say, I mean, building upon what Varun and Tarun said also, right? See, the difference that comes in the current way of doing things is that you are moving beyond a snapshot approach. So if you really look at the past way of, let's say, building somebody's credit worthiness was maybe having historical data about have they paid their credit card bills on time, or have they been paying their EMIs on time. Now the alternate data sources that we are already seeing getting used quite a lot are like, let's say, even if it's about, let's say, my ability or my intent to have, say, paid my electricity bills on time, let's say for past n number of times, itself tells something about the intent. It need not alone be a strong signal in itself, but combined with other signals of similar intent or nature, right? It can actually add a lot of value. So I would say some of the alternate data sources like these are being explored, and with the power of the models that are not just a snapshot in time, like the classical models, these actually become very easily admissible into your typical machine learning and decision making process. The other part I will say is even the ability to not just look at your say credit signals. One could even do a lot of analysis, and that also happens quite a lot. Like what we try doing also is intent analysis can be done with a lot of cross triangulation of data. So that intent, like which can probably be embedded in your bank statements. Like, do I have a habit of, say, spending money on online gambling? That probably is a risk signal. So some of those alternate data sources also help build quite a lot of powerful models today.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe just changing tracks again, we've spent a lot of time on the underwriting side. But if you, and Meghna, question to you is, if you think about the lending value chain, there is, post underwriting, there's disbursal, there is the post lending monitoring, early warning, perhaps even customer assistance, right? So if you think beyond underwriting, how are you seeing AI enabling the rest of the lending, ecosystem?
Sure. So one thing is to disperse the funds. The other thing is to collect and ensure your NPA levels at the bank or the lending institution is at an acceptable level. So we at crediWatch, we're actively working with banks and NBFCs to help their NPA be under control. And we have a product called the early warning system. And for almost a decade now, we're using, ensemble models and supervised models to help banks have a forward-looking prediction on the potential bankruptcy of customers that they've dispersed loans to, especially corporate customers. And what we've seen as a trend in the last few years is this kind of data and all of the outputs of these models have become a very valuable restructuring tools for institutions to kind of relook at relationships with certain customers when things are going bad. So rather than losing the customer, maybe they're able to restructure the relationship. And also the larger outcomes that we've seen from these sort of ensemble models are becoming really valuable tools for underwriting. And in fact, the larger corporate customers that we work with, where the lending is, let's say, $5 million and above, the crediWatch EWS score becomes a part of the credit assessment memo, and it's extremely crucial in terms of the overall, decision-making process. Also, if you look at the trend with respect to what is expected, banks are supposed to comply with the expected credit loss in the next year and a half, which means that when you actually overall look at your credit policy and how you're, lending to customers and how you're classifying them, on your book, you have to now look at forward-looking data and not in the rearview mirror. So keeping that in mind, because the products like what we have at crediWatch, the early warning system is much more forward-looking. It's based on behavior and future behavior and potential consequences. All of this would now become really valuable inputs for the ECL models, for NBFCs and banks, and would become extremely important in terms of the overall credit policies that institutions would have. So that's the trend that we're looking at.
Got it. So I think we spent some time thinking or discussing, and the panel has talked a little bit about how AI is already and can potentially transform the entire lending value chain. But let's spend some time now on perhaps some of the guardrails and pitfalls one has to keep in mind, right? And I'll start by saying, going back perhaps to you, Varun. Obviously, a lot of whether traditional techniques or AI model-based techniques rely on historical data that could have certain biases, prejudices against based on certain parameters, right? So how do you think about the right guardrails to de-bias these or correct these over time? Biases will creep in either from the past or an ongoing basis. So how do you guard against that?
So the first important piece of putting the right guardrails is knowing where your pitfalls are. And that becomes one of the most critical elements when we go into building our models and continuously monitoring and validating the models. So that's one of the big things in terms of understanding what is it that I need to be continuously observing for. For example, when you build models within the credit underwriting space, you start looking at what is the population that I am taking, which essentially is symptomatic of what population that we are going after. And that is a definition of the market that we want to go and address. Right? So that's like one of the things which start defining, which is defined by the lenders, defined by the market. So that becomes, okay, am I taking the right kind of population? Am I taking any kind of elements which might have historically been used for judgments, for example, gender or maybe regions, right? And those are things that you, during the building process itself, you try and completely extract them out of the model, because those are things which, all of which can actually introduce biases. You look at as neutral the data points that you can during the building process, and take out any of these bias points outside. Keep them, maybe you can, which is what we do, which is what lenders do today, where they build them either in some policy or they build them as a human judgment of an underwriter while they, but the models essentially are the place where you do not let any of these pieces come in, right? And the cycle is, as these models are getting more and more embedded in the decision process, it is important for continuously be able to monitor and validate that what they are doing is actually in line with what we had initially decided. And that's become one of the more critical elements today in terms of your own model validation as well as model monitoring exercise which the lenders are going. But that's probably one of the more critical elements which people had not been earlier focused on.
True, true. And I think in the frequency of that also probably has gone up.
Exactly. The frequency of that now is also a lot faster. Earlier, it was sometimes, like I know lenders used to take 2 years, 2.5 years to validate models. Today, that cycle has shortened down to a 6-month cycle. So that's how quickly that continues to get done.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I would like to add
Yeah,
a
please.
few more points to that. So one is of course about the prejudices, about the historical data. But I think the technical part also needs to be looked at as one of the areas of pitfalls, because the entire implementation of the program itself, where right from the training to the production, the safety and the security of data that needs to be looked at, and the financial institutions needs to get that comfort. It's obviously needs to be regulatory compliant, where regulator has already been saying that there has to be transparency, instead of using the black box, the transition has to happen to the glass box, where the transparency can be given about the decisions and the outcomes that has come from the model to both the players, the people who are actually lending and people who are actually at the receiving end. And I also believe about the data prejudices, just relying on some of the old legacy data, and that actually creating some kind of biases in the model. I remember when I was part of the issuance of credit card business, we had rules where on the other side of the street, the treatment of a customer was different across the street. Under the same PIN code, it was a different treatment. I think by and large, when I look at be it any product, these kind of biases are there. So it will give definitely in a AI model a different kind of outcomes. I also believe that any model that is being created needs to ensure that whatever the outcome is, the human intervention at the end has to be there to question the outcome and see that because of many rules, the unnecessary rejections are taken care of. Because the moment you bring any intelligence which is based on the machine, it will be completely on certain defined rules. And for today, with the human intervention, some of the positive calls of those cases are also being taken, and therefore over relying on any kind of model may cause some kind of pitfalls here.
Got it. I think you also covered one of the questions I was coming to, which is this notion of transparency, explainability. But Sumit, maybe if you put the two together, right, this thing about protecting against biases or constantly correcting for biases, and then tying up with what Tarun was saying around always the need for explainability, either internally or even perhaps to regulators. What's your view on that?
So I think there's a wonderful point, which came out in the previous, panel members who talked about it. The point being, there is going to always be this challenge of being able to perfectly answer why a model answered in a certain way. Even in a classical model sense, right? It used to be a very hard problem because finally the model was probably learning from data sets, and then it was trying to give an answer. Now it becomes even harder with the generative AI-led models, and even trickier with agentic AI, because now you have a system which is self-learning, evolving, and reasoning and giving you an answer. One of the things, in fact, I'll take an example. In fact, a very practical example of where I have seen, a bias that got crept into one of our, Gen AI-based model systems. and how we actually tackled it. So, see, one of our models for MSME lending tries to identify whether there is a shell behavior or a money laundering of some nature in that entity. After a lot of modeling that we had done and identified parameters for classical model, it was not doing well enough because, like we rightly said, right, that's a snapshot in time. So we switched to a generative AI based model. What it started doing is it's actually captured the that shell behavior very well. What we didn't realize it started doing, and these are like in early days when we were doing this, almost a year and a half, 2 years back. After some time, it started flagging more and more companies of a particular region as exhibiting shell behavior because it had seen some companies, having exhibited that behavior. Now, this is a very clear case of a bias. Now, we didn't realize it for some time. Then eventually, of course, when we realized and we safeguarded it, one of the very good techniques we have used is create an adversarial model, which is like an independent model, which independently looks at the outcome of your first model and tries identifying something like it. If it is able to identify from the outcome of the first model saying, here is the gender, then definitely the outcome of the first model is biased. If it is able to identify, here is the region, that is what I suspect, then 100% the first model is biased. So that's actually a very independent, a very powerful technique to safeguard your models against bias. Second, of course, is an ensemble technique, like where you can always bring in a classical model which you have built to actually judge the response. And third, nobody can rule out, like, what Tarun said, right? Human in the loop will play a very significant role, and I think would continue that way.
Thank you. I think there's one segment before we wrap up is to both of you, Hitarth and Meghna. I think lending is very diverse, right? Different products, ticket sizes, secured, unsecured, different customer segments, data availability, and therefore data availability itself is fundamentally very different. Even if you looked at non-traditional data, all of that. And therefore, I think, like we were discussing in the room as well, how and where you apply these models and techniques probably is very different. Like you have multiple product lines, right? So in some they might enable a human, in some they might do a large part of the decisioning. So how do you think about that, right? You've got all these techniques, you've got different products, each product caters a different customer segment. So how do you think about what techniques to apply where, how much of the decisioning AI does versus not? And so maybe you start with you, Hitarth, and then Meghna, your take on it.
It is as complex as it sounds. So, see, of course, one of the primary way that we approach this kind of a problem is how much risk are we okay to take, right, on different segments. Of course, there will always be certain segments there who are sitting on the boundary, on the edge line. The current model, which is of course having multiple input streams, will give a certain decisioning. And if that decisioning is to a certain level not really hitting our confidence levels, that's when it refers to our traditional or the previous model, with which we have seen our historical data of probability of defaults, right? How that has been there. And of course, when this happens, the moment this kind of a reference point between two models happens, it automatically the case goes to a human to see, watch and check for if the decision is to be taken correctly or to be rejected. Not just this, sometimes if the model is giving us answers which are too good to be true, those are also some of the other side of the bell curve that, oh wow, it looks like that. We were also discussing about the velocity of application. If there is some kind of a flow wherein it's really moving very fast, everything looks really like a golden flow, then definitely there is another alarm that is raised internally that probably somebody should look at it before the money actually moves, right? And sometimes it is also that users are referred to a longer path wherein there is a manual intervention, there needs to be a couple of steps done before the digital side of things can really flow through. We have seen good amount of experimentations where things have worked out in our favor and where we assume that, okay, on paper, the consumers really look very risky, but in actual, when we have taken a little bit risk on them, when there's been some experiments, they've done fairly well. So that's where the dilemma lies, but we are also kind of adapting to that part.
Meghna, your take on the same.
Yeah. So, in terms of the trends that we're looking at, especially if we're looking at, again, it's based on the risk profile of the borrower. So, if we look at segments that are, fairly well established, then, I think people would be comfortable with even, unsupervised models, right? But if you're looking at NTC and, newer segments, thin file customers, you just cannot go with an unsupervised model. So, that's the trend. Second, also in the entire, credit lending journey, you could use AI in different ways, right? So while we could look at generative AI, that could be useful much more in terms of an interactive tool to enhance the digital journey of the customer. But when you're actually making the credit decision, because we also have regulatory constraints in terms of what the regulator expects banks to do, we still will have to kind of look at, explainable models to make the actual decision. And that trend might remain that way, and we may not see a trend of completely unsupervised black box models taking over most of the lending anywhere in the near future. So from that perspective, like what we look at is generative AI, of course, is going to be a part of lending, but much more for the interaction collection of data. Right, and we see that explainable glass box models are still here to stay for the foreseeable future in terms of most aspects of lending.
Got it. I think, as the panel is saying, I think there's a whole host of AI techniques from classical models to, deep learning models and all of that. And I think what I'm taking away is you have to think about where and how you apply them and how much of the decisioning is done. So that brings us to the last part of this conversation, and we'll do this as a little bit of we'll poll everyone a very quick 30-second answer. So if that's what's going to happen, and I assume if we think about, for lack of a better word, decisioning, unsupervised sort of percentage at X today, that will only keep increase going forward, right? And therefore, if you think of the traditional roles of a credit officer and an underwriter and for that extent a risk team, how do you think those roles are going to change? Are they going to be more, to your point, supervisors, people who just intervene on a sample basis, people who are model governors versus decision makers, right? So how do you think that's going to change? Would be good to get a very quick 30-second across all of you. Will wrap up and then maybe take 2 audience questions.
Sure.
Start with you.
So, as I said earlier, I think for data risk officers, of course, the governance of the models comes into picture. That's their primary job, because half of the job is already being done by the digital models. However, in my opinion, each model that's being published and being replicated to the live data set has to come with an expiry, right? And it has to go through its own phase of evolution in the next few months or next few years based on the book size that you are managing. Probably that has to be a thumb rule internally for the risk officer also to be relevant and to kind of really take control of the situation and be answerable.
Let's go down the line.
So apart from having a chief risk officer or a chief credit officer, obviously you need to have your chief data scientist. And as banks and lending institutions would kind of go completely digital and adopt AI, I think that's a new role that I would foresee in the future that would have that kind of impact and implications that would expect from traditional credit officers.
I think I would agree with Meghna, but I have a point to make here. For any company to adapt any kind of new AI models and before hiring the data scientist, I think what is more important is for the cleaning of the data itself, the hygiene of the data, and setting up the accountability across all the levels within the organization. So whether it is business, risk, technology, and who is actually going to work as a model governor, etc. And third, which is extremely important, is ensuring that the compliance and the regulators' guidelines are completely compliant. I think these are the 3 things would be very important. And just to close, I think as institutions, we are definitely in India. We are fortunate. We are absolutely in the right place. I don't think any other country that I come across would be having such kind of robust data rail where you have Aadhaar, you have UPI, you have digital lockers. If you have got facility of account aggregators. I think, with the right accountabilities being set, a great models can be implemented.
Sure. I think I may not have too much to add, given everybody has given very good, viewpoints. Maybe I'll just say, maybe I would just remind us all saying that, what really are these generative AI models and techniques that are getting further built upon it really. They really are like, what generative AI really gave us is a way to get the model to answer very generic questions. So then it boils down to a fact that anybody who can ask great questions actually will make a great difference to how these models really evolve over a period of time. So I would say the role would actually evolve into, more intelligent underwriters. When I say more intelligent, not that their intelligence is going to change because of the model. They are the ones who are going to impart intelligence to these models with great questions. So I would say not just as a governance, but I think more as a teacher. Like if you really see, right, I could be asking a question to my child and somebody else could be asking the same question in a way that actually makes the child think more. And that's exactly what the generative AI models are good at, that they can do a lot of great work if I give them an instruction which probably requires them to reason and think about it. I think their role will change to a teacher more, alongside, of course, as a governor.
So, as Sumit just said, I won't have a lot to add considering everyone's kind of covered most of the
What
topics.
happens when you're at the end?
But I think the underwriter officers will definitely turn into more like supervisors, depending on product type. That's from their role perspective. If you look at how the underwriters today exist, their role definitely is going to be a lot more supervisory of the process itself, supervisory of the not really model because that's somewhere else that goes in. But supervisory of decisions definitely, whether it is sampling or whether it is through the right way. Also at the same time, probably having superpowers compared to the underwriters today, because the AI and whether it's generative AI or a combination of generative using agentic AI transforms the kind of work that they do to at least 10x, if not more, looking at think of a mortgage product or think of a large collateral value product or a MSME lending product scenario where most of the work used to happen manually, eyeballing and looking at it and talking to people. And today, all of that piece can be. So that's definitely where the big change in their life is going. And also the opportunity for lenders to do more, because that allows to go to a situation where you can actually open up new segments, bring in the efficiencies which you did not have, go deeper into NTC segments which you would not have touched earlier. So all in all, I think it's a very positive scenario to look at it from a market point.
Okay, on that positive note, 2 questions maybe we'll take anybody in the audience. Could we get the mic to ma'am, please?
Yeah, hi. Poonam from ICICI Bank. So there's a question as in how can AI-powered lending models balance between, I would say, faster credit decision, and when I say faster credit decisions, these are with an imperative to prevent the bias and ensure fair access to the credit for the underserved communities of India. How would that balance be established for a faster credit and the biases and whatever we have for the underserved?
Anybody wants to? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Pooja. Quite a good question. I think, again, it also depends on the segments that you are referring to. If the data stream is available, if it is available, then of course, today to a certain level, a lot of digital players who are there in the lending industry, they are doing this to a certain level. Of course, within a certain risk spectrum, right? It again depends completely on the risk ability of the org, that whether I am going to be bullish about it or I'm going to be conservative. If they are in a growth phase to expand their book, of course, there are a few leeways that are being taken today, but not directly via AI all the time, is what my opinion is. Again, others can pitch in.
You want to? Yeah, please.
Just to add there, Pooja, I think from a AI point, when we are actually going and lending, what it enables us is to price risk differently for different segments. Now, all of these segments existed earlier. We were not able to price the risk for those segments because either we were not able to do a decision quickly enough, or we were not able to do any kind of judgment without having those people go in and look and talk to them. With the access or availability of some set of data, whether it comes via AA, whether it comes via a bureau, whether it comes via some alternate data set like a electricity bill or a ownership, and an ability to assess those, allows now, and using AI on top of that, allows us to price that risk and create differential risk pricing for different sets of customers, and that changes over a period of time. So primarily AI allows that to happen, which enables us to go deeper into those kind of segments that you just spoke.
Yeah. One more question, if there might be any. Please.
My question is related to basically how effectively we will be able to use the AI models in this scenario. See, basically developing the AI model and training it, we need a lot of data, right? So entity which is having a lot of data, like the big financial institutes, they are having a lot of data. So they will be able to train their model well, or the model they are using, that will be well trained, right? And the entity which is having a less data, that will be able to use the model which will not be well trained and maybe giving any decisions and all that. So at the end of the day, we will be falling in the scenario that the entity which having a monopoly on the data will be using the effective model, and the entity new entrant or the entity which will be having less data, that will be using a less efficient model. So how these things, how you are envisaging to take care of such basically contrast in this adopting the AI?
You want to?
So I think I'll take this question.
Yeah, please.
And probably Puneet can give a better answer, but something that has come in my mind. This is exactly where the role of the credit bureau come in the picture, because they have lots of data and they would be able to provide you some kind of assessment. Along with that, when we talk about digital public infrastructure in this country, to judge the behavior of a customer, account aggregation is going to play a very important role. Having the access of any of the entities who can actually provide you the services of account aggregation can actually help you to get the behavioral data of a customer. And what Pooja has asked would also help to serve the underserved or underbanked customer in the industry. So Puneet, in case you can add more.
Sure. I think it's a great question and a great observation. But I would say, while your observation is very correct, data is a very significant part to training a model. But in a very, I would say also in a very traditional sense. I'm not denying the advantage or value of data. See, why would we need data in a traditional model sense is like if I figured out as a data scientist and with my business users saying that these are the 10 important parameters that influence my outcome, whatever it be that I'm trying. Now I need data which has enough variability about all 10 parameters so that my model can learn the underpinnings. However, what we are trying to do through this process is to impart intelligence to the model so that it can look at new sets of data and make predictions. What is it that generative AI kind of models are bringing to the table is that they have already come understanding a whole lot of information. If I as an expert can impart that intelligence, which in a traditional sense used to be learned over a period of time, I can actually also get to a very good state, which could be like, let's say if an expert underwriter sits and tells the model saying that, hey, here are the key parameters that you should consider, that I consider when I look at an application and reject it. And here is why you should look at it. After that, it becomes a question of, even if you have, say, certain amount of data, you could actually very quickly with generative AI models, they are so good at generating synthetic data. And that's what we do because see, as a company, we are also not allowed to keep any data beyond certain period of time, but we still need to create models. In fact, we are asked by our banks and partners to delete or purge our data within 2 days, 3 days or whatever, which means I rarely never have any data that actually I can train on, but I can still create a lot of synthetic data for myself And that small amount of window that I have, right, I can still take a lot of metadata and still train my models, especially with the new techniques that are there. So that's what I will say. So definitely not denying the power of data, but the imparting of intelligence from that data can still be done today, given the recent techniques.
Why don't you wrap up, Meghna?
Yeah, to wrap it up, you also don't need very large data sets to train ML models anymore. There are models which are based on, smaller amounts of data, and that's becoming extremely popular. So especially if you're a new institution and or you're entering into a very new segment, then deploying these sort of technologies and all of these infrastructure for this, I think AWS and all of them have ready-made infrastructure to deploy such models. So I think as a new organization or an organization that's data thin, there are options available.
Yeah. So I think we'll conclude with that. I'm sure the panel members are around and have this conversation over lunch. So with that, back to you.
I want to take this opportunity and thank all our esteemed panelists for taking the time off and joining us out here and sharing with us your thoughts, inputs, and insights. Ladies and gentlemen, please do put your hands together and let's give a loud round of applause to our esteemed panelists. Before I could let you go for the noon and the day, if I could request you to step to the forefront of the stage to quickly have a picture capturing the moment of having our esteemed panelists together.